like nothing. But nobody disputes his control over the drug trade and the fact of a specific faction of the Sinaloa cartel. He would be my number one priority to go after. But if you go after him, if you think what we saw in Culiacan this year was bad, wait until you go after that guy. Like, I tell this to all the people who observe Mexico. Mexico is going to be in absolute chaos because he has a very powerful control over factions that operate under his banner. Two of them specifically, Los Rusos and Grupo Flecha, just to name an example. But yeah, you go after him, you better prepare for very high, like Culiacan times 1,000. And if that does happen, by the way, I'm not going to be able to sleep. It's going to be absolute hell for me.
All that means is you have to build a team in advance who can share the load. You know, you made the comment about the brother being captured, them not doing anything about it, and you know the speculation. Oh, maybe they gave him up because a colonel had been killed a week or so before. I didn't realize. Maybe this is naivety, but that the cartels are regularly giving people up, as in, oh, we took some of yours, so it's just fair. And I only came across that from your tweets in the last 2 days in connection with this kidnapping and murder of, kidnapping of 4 Americans, murder of 2 of them. And then the cartel turned around and gave up, 5 sicarios, saying,
yeah, they gave up 5.
Yeah. And so, with breaking stories like this, like the kidnapping of these Americans, do look at all sources feed, because he's keeping up on this latest news, and I'm learning things from it, quite often. So I know that we had a speaker who was up, Balanced Life, who has said that he can't speak right at the moment. I think he may have sent his question to Jacoby, and he had actually been ahead in the line. So Jacoby, did you want to pass along his question?
Sure. Thanks, Michael. He had a 2-part question that sort of zooms out a little bit from what we've been talking about. In the last, 20, 30 years that we've seen the rise of private military contractors, he's curious to know whether or not you feel that the cartels are modeling their structure of private military contractors. After like armed military activities.
That's a good question.
And secondly, whether you feel that the cartels are aligning themselves with any particular government, or I'm not sure if he means by that party, if we're relating it to Mexico or just more broadly in Latin American cartels operating there. Specifically, he's looking at those that are able to support their narcotics operations, government entities, or I imagine political affiliations, which would be part of their revenue generation.
Yeah. So let me. So the private military, the kind of like this mercenary. I mean, that's probably not a bad comparison. I would have to do a little bit more research to give you a definitive answer, but I think they do operate as military formation styles, etc. They're not there's probably very small elements of the cartels that are very well trained and well equipped, but for the most part, when you deal with these cartels, they're not. But that's an interesting thing, and I think that's not a bad comparison. But Balance, I will take that as an RFI, and I'll get back to you on that. And then the question about cartels aligning with Mexican governments. Yes, absolutely. So one of the reasons why we saw violence explode very heavily in Mexico so Mexico for the longest time was basically a one-party rule, right? The PRI. And then like in, I want to say 2000, they kind of became a multi-party democracy. That's when we started to see violence go up and up and up and up and up, because it used to be in the past. I mean, again, I'm not saying you watch Narco Mexico, you're an expert. Please do not imply this, but just look at the show, right? Like the Mexican government heavily controlled narco trade. And it was run by one party. There you go. When it became a democracy, now cartels had to compete between different political factions, and some political factions, and not even within the political party, just individual leaders, right? And then they would have to, like, who is who helps who funds who, and that's one of the huge underlying issues of corruption and violence in Mexico, right? In some Mexican election cycles, we saw enormous amounts of political violence, huge amounts of political assassinations tied to the drug trade, right? And cartel violence and corruption, right? So you would have one cartel assassinate a political leader, and then the rival cartel would assassinate their political leader. I mean, it just connects. So at the local, state, and federal level, yes, they are different factions, and different cartels would corrupt different elements of the Mexican government, regardless of what locality, state, or federal government, right? In military units as well. Like, and so it's kind of like this competition of who you can have, and based on the territories you operate. So like naturally, for example, Jalisco State, is the political leaders in Jalisco State are probably more beholden to CJNG in the corruption aspect, right? But if you look, let's say, at Sonora, right there, and Sinaloa, they're more in the Sinaloa cartel. But even within the factions and other these political parties, they compete within that, and some of the ways you can track that is through political violence. But yes, absolutely. Now, can you let's say the governing party of Mexico, Morena, is tied to the Sinaloa cartel? There is some reports, and there is some reports about that, actually, of some Mexican reporters have tried to connect Morena and AMLO, specifically the Mexican president, with certain elements of the Sinaloa cartel. That is totally plausible. I think that those are credible and not surprising. The New York Times did a phenomenal article, and I know you guys are great. Jacoby, if you may, or because I know you do this great as a host, if you can find, it's called Cienfuegos. So Cienfuegos, Cienfuegos. He was a Mexican general. He was the army chief. The New York Times had a great article about him. That laid out, because he was captured by he was detained in LA during the Trump administration, and then he was let go because of an uproar in Mexico. The New York Times article about that lays out the connection between elements of the Sinaloa cartel and a specific faction that was part of the Sinaloa cartel that broke off, and their connection with who was the army chief of Mexico for 4 years, right? So this is where, though, it's hard to track, because a lot of times Mexican journalists that try to track this, specifically the nexus between corruption and cartels and the political parties, those are the journalists that get assassinated. And so for people who don't know, Mexico is actually the second most violent country for journalists, behind Ukraine. And Ukraine is an active war zone, right? Mexico suffers the most amount of journalists assassinated. And I think it's been multiple years now in a row, and now only second to Ukraine. So the reason why is because a lot of the journalists who try to track that nexus between cartels and the political parties get targeted and assassinated, and it forces the Mexican journalists to self-censor. Right. And I think that the self-censoring of a lot of these Mexican journalists caused kind of this explosion, specifically in Twitter and Telegram, of these independent OSINT or Mexican accounts that track cartel violence, right? OSINT aggregators or OSINT accounts that actually actively track this. Because they understand that a lot of times journalists who take the risk of covering it will get assassinated. But there's multiple reports that lays out different political parties, different political leaders. And Tamaulipas, a former state governor, was heavily known to be absolutely corrupt, to the point that everybody suspected he had his own private army that operated. He utilized the state police as his private army to do the cartel's bidding in those areas, right? So it's well documented, and that's probably one of the problems why it's really hard to fix the issue of cartel violence when you have the Mexican government. And this is something I've gone back and forth with a lot of Mexican bloggers about, is how can you analyze the cartel violence because when you analyze, let's say, an insurgency, you generally have a state and then a non-state actor, and then it's, the competition and the reduction of monopoly of violence. How do you analyze it when the Mexican government at federal, state, and local levels, operating at different echelons and different cartels, all compete between each other's. Like this is where I think Mexico might be a little bit different, and that's kind of the paper I want to write. And having this input from a lot of the people that I talk to who are very knowledgeable about this kind of enlightened me, because I cannot take the standard procedure of international relations and nation state analysis to really delve into this, because the Mexican government is a party as well in the drug trade.
Thanks for that fulsome answer. To those who have been waiting, hopefully you'll just be patient. I'm going to go to OPSEC as co-host privilege, and then we'll run through the remaining hands. Allsource has been generous enough to be with us for an hour. So to the extent you can, if you can keep your questions brief, then we'll get through as many as possible. OPSEC, go ahead.
Yeah, so that question, I think it was from ID10T, about the structure, immediately brought to mind Los Zetas, which were, these members of the Airborne Special Forces from the Mexican Army. They were recruited, as I understand it, into the Gulf Cartel. And they really are, at the core of seeing the increase of sort of this terroristic violence for the sake of violence, but also the militarization, because you have these former special forces members from the GAFE who were then pulled into the drug war. And it went from being sort of a drug war between, what we would recognize as gangs to this more structured militaristic operation. And I would love to hear Allsource sort of expand on that, but my first thought is it's very similar in terms of taking these former operators, just as you see with some of these PMCs or military contractors, and putting them into a similar but different role.
Yeah, OPSEC, excellent comparison to Zetas. Absolutely spot on, 100%. And ironically, they broke off from the Gulf Cartel, and now, and actually, a follow-on. So the Zeta cartels, as we know back then, is kind of had to be rebranded because they were heavily targeted because the enormous amount of violence they did. Right, the Zeta cartels were enormously brutal, even by cartel standards. That the Mexican government went hard on them, and so then they fractured, and then they kind of formed this new one that's called Cartel de Noreste. So the Northeast Cartel, and the acronym they use is CDN/Zetas. That's because they're an extension. They're a successor of the Zeta cartels, right? They broke off from the Gulf Cartel, and that was a lot of the violence. But the Zetas were kind of hired by the Gulf cartels to fight the Sinaloa cartels originally, and then they all, and that's the God bless the New York Times. I was blown away by it. Please give it a read.
Okay, guys. So we'll run through hands again. If you can try to be as brief as possible, we won't overtax all source. Brad, would you like to go ahead? And then after that, it'll be Aaron.
Sure. Before I get into my question, quick clarification. So OPSEC mentioned ETA, and then Allsource mentioned Zeta. ETA is a Basque separatist group. Are we talking about?
No, I said Zeta.
Okay, you did say Zeta. Okay, cool. All right. So, and before my question, I'm really glad that Allsource brought up Pyotr's accent, because I've heard something today that I can't unhear. And it's the striking resemblance between Allsource's voice and Ron DeSantis. And so my request is that at some point, I would love to hear an Allsource Ron DeSantis impersonation. That would be freaking fantastic. Now, on to my question. In line with what Balance was talking about, or related to it, but different. Have you seen any evidence? I mean, as we look at the world, there's lots of threats out there. There's a lot of bad actors, and a lot of their incentives are aligned. It's like we've got this modern day Hall of Doom, to put it in the DC Comics terms, at work, trying to undermine our interests. And with Mexico being such an important partner going forward, both economically, super crazy important to our growth, but also I'd argue demographically, there's a lot of reasons why foreign actors would want to undermine our relationship with Mexico and just throw as many wrenches into that mix as possible. My question is, have you seen any evidence of foreign actors being involved, and what capabilities do the cartels need that they don't have that could be provided by, say, Russia or China or whoever? What have you heard?
So I think, the Russians, one of the things I have talked about is I have seen in because Telegram, I have seen, and it not as much, but as when it started, when Russia invaded Ukraine, but I have seen a lot of people kind of posting, and I did a couple of threads on this. I have shared pro-Russian accounts and propaganda and these narco Telegram channels, right, to kind of spread the message. I mean, and we all know like how Russia and China and all these like influence, Spanish speaking, state propaganda channels. There's always going to be an underlying aspect in Latin America of anti-Americanism. That's just based on our own actions and the history and the things that we did, but also just generic. But at the same time, and I think what people need to kind of understand and realize is, just look at the demographics of our Hispanic American community, our Latin American community in the United States, right? That is a huge amount of soft power that you can never undermine, right? And most South American countries now, especially now, understand that the primary political, military, and economic relationships they're going to need is with the United States, right? That they cannot rely on anybody else, and they want it because of our position in Latin America and in the American continent, right? And so there's not much they can do to kind of undermine that. They're going to be, I would say, Russian, China actions are more of a nuisance on the propaganda side, but nothing really threatening. Mexico's economy is wholeheartedly dependent on the U.S., so they're never going to do anything that sacrifices that economic relationship. To your second point, and what I would say, right, is cartels. Let's not forget, like 70% of the weapons that the cartel get is from the United States because of our lax gun laws. Like I'm not trying to make an argument for or against the Second Amendment. I don't want anybody to take any way, shape, or form that. But it's clear as day that 70%, if not more, of the weapons that not only go to Mexico but across South America, that is causing a lot of issues about ability of these Latin American countries to control the population is challenged because of our guns being trafficked across Latin and South America. To the point that even, like, for example, Haiti, right? In Haiti, there's so many reporting out there of gangs that have basically paralyzed the country are able to outgun the Haitian police because they get guns from the U.S., right? And so the cartels have the ability to get guns from the U.S. You see them, one of the things, one of the OSINT accounts I deal with regularly, his name is Casas Belli. Casas Belli is a French OSINT account. And I remember months ago, he shared an image about a Brazilian gang member who had an M82, anti-material rifle. It's like, oh my God, how the hell did the Brazilians have this? And I'm like, dude, that is so common. And I just bombarded him with like images of Mexican cartel members with the M82. Like, dude, this is common. And he brought up an excellent point. And he said, you don't see this in Africa. He tracks Africa and the Middle East very extensively. He's like, you don't see this like by insurgent groups that operate in Africa or the Middle East, M82s. But in Mexico, it's like impossible not to see it every day. And that's because of our issues that are just as we complain that Mexico doesn't control the fentanyl or the drug trade, the Mexicans turn around and say, well, why don't you control the gun trade? Because we get flooded by your guns all the time. Like, why don't you control your border as well and stop the guns flowing in from here, right? I don't see cartels and the last thing I think, to answer your point, that the cartels want is to be in any way, shape, or form associated with an adversary of the United States, like a geopolitical adversary. Like, can you imagine if because of two Americans got killed, the Gulf cartels turned over 5 people, sent a note saying, hey, our bad, we apologize, please don't fuck with us. Can you imagine for a second if we have actionable intelligence that they're receiving weapons from Russia? First of all, the problem that would get into is that then Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, whoever, and our adversaries, they're undermining the Mexican government, and they don't want to do that, right? Because even though the Mexican government has very deep political relations and economic relations with the U.S., they also understand, like, hey, they probably want relations with us, and we want to be friendly with Mexico, right? So they don't want to have the optics of their weapons, state-sponsored, being shipped to cartels that undermine the Mexican government. And then second, the Mexican cartels, like, they have black market access. They can get weapons, right? They have black market access. It's not that difficult for weapon trafficking to happen around the world. But they do not want that association, because they understand that the U.S. government is going to go after them hard. And the last thing cartels want in any shape or form is for the U.S. government to go after them hard. And I think the incident that happened this weekend with the 2 Americans killed kind of proves that. And we've seen cartel members go to great lengths to ensure that if there's a fuck up and one of their guys kill an American, they kind of turn that guy in. And I was actually, Bond, to your point, I know you were surprised that all that happened. And what I was surprised about was like, holy shit, those 5 Sicarios are actually alive. I thought they were just going to kill them, dismember their bodies, drop it there, leave a narco message saying, we are sorry, Uncle Sam. Literally, that's what I thought they were going to do. Like, I was like, holy shit, they actually turned them in alive? That's nuts. That's what surprised me, not that they were going to do something like that.
Why do you think they did that?
They don't want America to go after them. They don't.
No, but I mean, why turn them in alive as opposed to what you expect?
I think it's because of the notion of, like, when the Americans said justice will be served, I think they probably thought, like, maybe they wanted to get them alive to, like, fit that. And they might have thought, like, oh, if we kill them, they might not believe us, or it's a cop out. Or at the same time, they might have thought to themselves, we don't want to kill our own guys. But if we turn them into Mexican authorities and they kind of stay in Mexican prison, or if they get extradited, we'll take care of your family. You just have to turn yourself in. And maybe that was a good comparison. I think in 2000, before, we've seen the Zeta cartels, when one of their guys killed by accident some Americans in a lake that borders the U.S. and Mexico. The Zetas just killed the dude, like, dismembered his body and be like, yep, this guy killed an American. We killed him for you. Our bad. Sorry. And this is with the Zetas. Like, they understand. Like, I know people go to Kiki Camarena. I think that at the Kiki Camarena was like, whoa, okay. The worst thing a cartel member wants is to be extradited to the U.S. because at that point they know they're done. They're done. If you get extradited to the United States, it's the end of your career.
Okay, guys, a couple more hands. Aaron, go ahead.
Oh, how you doing, guys? Just to talk about last night, all sorts. You remember you were talking in the Balmer report in MySpace about our prediction about Berdyansk, and it looks like it came true because they did declare that was retaliation for Berdyansk, and so the missile strikes in Ukraine I'm referring to. So it looks like you were pretty on there. We had thought that this was very similar to the Kerch Bridge and onward. It looks like that. Also, OPSEC, I put in the nest there. It's 3 down. The types of rounds, it's in French, but there's some munitions that are the 120 that might fit in the broad thinking of the MO 120, so the RT 61 120 millimeter. So that's a list there of different rounds, and yes, one of them on there, or at least one, is GPS guided. So I don't know if it's that one we're looking at, but yeah, that's just some reference there. Because I would like to know too. It's a possibility that it's the rounds that were mentioned, although we don't know yet. Thanks, guys. I can't stay on long. I'm working on a model howitzer. All right. Talk to you soon.
Just to give context to what Aaron was saying, in one of the chats, OPSEC had raised a question about a photo of a mortar in flight that looked like it might have had guidance fins on it. And so Aaron's just bringing forward some conversations we were having in the background to add a little detail for OPSEC. I believe it was Riverside and then Cameron. Go ahead, Riverside.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I'm wondering if for product that doesn't originate in Mexico, where is it coming from, and where in general, what's the distribution route for Mexican drugs? And my second question is about the border, U.S. border with Mexico. It's hard to get good factual information because, or in my opinion, the Border Patrol is a lot of propaganda comes out of there. So I'm curious as to what you think is actually going on at the border, not the drugs that come in through regular channels and trucks and everything through the regular, but smuggled drugs across the border and trafficking. Thanks.
Yeah. So, Riverside, that's great. Comments, questions. What I would say is that the drugs, there's multiple ways that they get smuggled. The vast majority. So if you're looking at cocaine, most of it comes from Colombia, obviously, and then gets smuggled into Ecuador, Venezuela, and then either they take the Atlantic route or Pacific route through narco submarines or boats. We've also seen planes get flown into Central America and then through land routes into Mexico. We also see planes flying in Mexico with drug trade. That's something I track vigorously and gets uploaded on social media. Actually, funny enough, while I was doing research on a video that I saw to try to geolocate a specific airfield that the cartel members from a video where you see a drug plane landing, a Cessna, I actually found, and I kid you not, I found a drop pin on a remote airstrip, and it literally just said airstripped. I clicked on it, and on it, the coordinates it gave, the Google media, and I think they deleted it, but the Google media was from a year ago, and it literally had a guy recording a drug plane, and you can see the AK-47, and you can see drug bags getting loaded onto the plane. It was a Google pin drop, and the pin drop was the media that. I'm like, wow, these guys really don't care. And I am not making this story up. I swear to you. So you see that. You see land corridor, air corridor, sea corridor. They use every route. And so when you're tracking one of the ways you can kind of see where violence happenings is because of the drug routes. So for example, Zacatecas, one of the states in central Mexico, is a major drug route up. And you kind of see cartels fight for it. Now, it's not necessarily to control the drug trade a lot of times. A lot of time it's just to control businesses and the territory of it, not to be necessarily involved in the drug trade, just the routes or businesses in that area, right? But once the drugs get into Mexico and they get smuggled to the north, 90% of drugs that get smuggled into the United States are through land border ports of entry, legal crossings. Like this idea that it's drug mules crossing in between borders, it is not true. It is not. 90% of it comes through ports of entry, right? I mean, that's how they do it. because they want volume. That's what they care about. Volume, volume, volume. Is there incidents of them utilizing points in between borders in these remote areas? Of course. But 90%, if you track CBP data and Border Patrol data, they will all say drug seizures occurs either at ports of entries or along major highways near ports of entry, like I-10, right? I-10 is a huge drug route, a huge drug corridor. And there's a reason why Border Patrol has Border Patrol stops, checkpoints across I-10. Like if anybody has driven I-10 anywhere like west of El Paso to San Diego, you're going to stop through multiple Border Patrol checkpoints. And a lot of it is for drugs because that is a huge route that they take. San Diego port of entry is a major, San Isidro, right, is a major drug trafficking area. And it's impossible to get it all. You can't. Another way we see them doing drug smuggling is mailing. They actually just mail packages. And what they'll do is, and if anybody listens, this happens to you, what they'll do is they'll mail package randomly. They'll have somebody in the lookout. And then when that package is arrived into this random house, they'll have somebody pick it up and then take it with them. And what has happened in the past is just random Americans come home, oh, I got a package. They open it and it's drugs and they freak out. Listen, if that happens to you, call the authorities. They're not going to detain you. They're not going to suspect you're a drug trafficker. They know this happens all the time. And the cartel's not going to go after you. What they're going to do is they're just going to write it off as a loss. They're going to write it off as a loss because it's quantity. Cartel members, the cartels are businesses. They have acceptable losses. They understand that not everything is going to go through. If there's a major screw up, yeah, they'll go after that drug trafficker or that drug distribution center or that producer. Like we saw reports that the Sinaloa cartel was going after certain elements of the FARC terrorist organization, Colombia, because they fucked up on a very important major drug deal and they were trying to go after these guys. But these guys are businesses and they're not just going to go after random Americans. And I do want to provide an important caveat. Do not mistake. This is an important distinction. Are there incidents of cartel members targeting Americans in U.S. soils, right, for drug trades, etc.? Yes, there is. But that's not the primary people who target people in the drug in drug violence in America, right? Is not cartel members operating in Mexico targeting Americans in Americas forever. That is not the typical way we see homicides related to drug violence in the United States. Most of those cases are actually related to gangs, U.S. gangs, because at the gang level, they don't have that much margin for errors, unlike the cartels, right? So the incident that happened in California when 6 people were killed, that was tied to gang violence. It's not necessarily cartel members. The cartels just send the drugs into the U.S. They have their gangs, they have their distributors, they have their contacts, they have their connections, and they send it out there. At that point, they just, all right, we're good to go, right? There is cartel violence and presence in the U.S., but the vast majority of homicides related to the drug trade in the United States is more tied to local gangs than the actual cartel members. And I think there's a misconception of that. And people assume that like cartel members are just going to go into like, a random town in Kansas City and shoot them up because but no. Most of the times when something like that happens, it's more related to local gangs.
Jacoby, did you have something to add in?
Yeah, I just wanted to draw your attention to something somebody in the space shared. It's a risk map, a 2023 risk map analyzing the Mexico cartel war from Global Guardian. I don't know if you have had occasion to see it.
No, but I'm going to look into it. I appreciate you sharing it. The ones I've used is the Arms Center ACLED. They did one. I did not see that one, so I will definitely give that a read. I'm going to open it so I can read it after the space.
I will say that that ACLED map is really an incredible resource. You can really zero in on so much of that map and information that they provide on that. Highly recommend that too.
So also, you've been very generous with your time. Do you have a few more minutes to take last 2 hands?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, go for it. The main concern I had was this call, and I will have to leave. But
Yep.
The reason why I was in a rush was more the call.
Okay. So Dr. Paul and then Cameron, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And also, it's happy to have you on tonight, man. I've been wanting to talk to you about Mexico for a little bit. Just a couple of quick questions. What do you see as the probability that the United States will designate the narcos as terror organizations? One. Two, what would a military intervention look like? And three, how efficacious do you think it would be? And do you think it's just going to simply resemble kind of what we saw? Is it bringing back the era of essentially Pablo Escobar days and, with Delta Force and things like that?
So one of the things that we track a lot, I think there's a lot of politics involved, and I think the foreign terrorist organization designation of cartels is a lot of politics. I will highlight that Trump, when he was president, threatened to do it, and he didn't because he understood that, hey, Mexico borders us, and we don't want to piss off the Mexican government, and if they don't want this, maybe not a good idea. I'm wondering now with 2024, there is a huge shift in political rhetoric. But even Ted Cruz on Fox News said, he kind of was like calming people down, like we're not going to go into Mexico, we're not going to invade Mexico, like everybody calm the fuck down. We're not going to do that. I think a lot of it, again, is more tied to politics than anything else. So I'm watching it. That's something I monitor and I tweet about when I see Republican congressmen and Republican talking points about this. But again, I still think it's more in the politics than policy, right? I don't think we're at the policy point yet. The White House has already said we're not going to do it. It doesn't make any sense. So that's that. How would a U.S. military intervention look like? Man, I mean, you again. I go back. I don't think I go back to like you have to really do it with the Mexican government. I don't see unilateralism, and I think that the Mexican government says, "America, we're not going to let you do this." I just can't envision them doing it by themselves. I mean, what, you're going to bomb a couple of drug labs? Okay, and what the hell is that going to do? It's not going to do much, and you're just going to piss off the Mexican government, and you're just going to look like a fool in the international community because you're violating national sovereignty. And again, by the way, like, you want to stop the drug trade, you got to control the ports of entry. Oh, but by the way, if you try to actually control the ports of entry, you screw up our trade. I mean, ask Greg Abbott how that went when he put the secondary checkpoints in Texas, right? What did the Mexican truckers do? They blocked the ports of entries. They protested. And Greg Abbott quickly did a 180. Yeah, he says like, oh, I got an agreement with the governors of my Mexican counterpart governors, and we made. No, you didn't do shit. You just pissed off a lot of people. And then the business side of the House of the Republican Party started pulling their hair and be like, dude, what the hell are you doing? Like, you can't do this. That's not like. So this military intervention, again, I'm not necessarily against it, but my philosophy is you have to do it with the Mexican government. And if you do, I think the only real way you can do it is maybe the Colombian model, but in the way that you integrate U.S. and there's ample reporting that U.S. military personnel have operated in Mexico. I think there was this soft threat report of when they went after Chapo. That there was Delta Force involved in it. I'm not surprised, and I think that's how you just integrate with the Mexican government. And there's a lot of collaboration from the military and the federal police with U.S. federal law enforcement and military. And I think you can maybe expand on it. You can make it more public. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that you have U.S. military personnel publicly deployed to Mexico at the invitation of the Mexican government to assist them in this. But I just think, again, politics is one thing, policy is another. We're not going to have drone strikes against cartel members. It's just, I don't see it. And regardless, the Mexican, I don't envision there ever going to be a situation where that actually happens. The Mexican cartels are not in the desire to rule Mexico. They want to corrupt it for their own purposes, but that's a fundamental difference in actually ruling it. And that's why they're not a political insurgency, right? They're not designed they don't want to take power. And they understand that they need the Mexican government to do a lot of their work. And even the cartels, because again, don't think that all cartels are involved in the drug trade, right? They're not. This is a very important point. I can go to one specific example, the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel, which is very active in Guanajuato, the state. and is one of the main reasons why Guanajuato as a state is one of the most violent states in the world with one of the highest homicide rates in the world, right, is because they fight against CJNG in Guanajuato. The Santa Rosa de Lima cartel has minimal involvement in the drug cartel in the grand scheme of thing, right? And when you analyze it, they're not a drug trafficking organization, as we know. What they care about is control of territory for extortion purposes, right? They extort the population, they terrorize the population. And when we see mass shootings in Guanajuato, a lot of times what we see is the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel will target a business, let's say a bar. They'll go in, they'll shoot the bar up, they'll kill 10 people, and they'll drop a message saying, we shot this bar up because you were paying fees to our rival, the CJNG. They don't care about drugs. That's not why they fight. It's control of territory and extortion. And so in some of those incidents, they might try to challenge Mexican authority, but at the end of the day, I'm not seeing Mexican cartels like running, water facility plants. That's the fundamental difference.
Dr. Paul, did you want to come back in on
Yeah,
that?
yeah. Think real quick. So yeah, thanks, all sorts. Great to hear your perspectives on all that. I think the one thing I have issue with is how much can we trust the Mexican government at all to collaborate with them? They are, in my view, and I'm no expert whatsoever, my view is they're corrupt beyond reproach, worse than Afghanistan maybe. They've been in bed with the narcos for decades, I mean, since the beginning of time. How can we trust them as a partner in anything they do or say? And in my view, at some point, there is a Mexican, expert, like from the Sean Ryan Show podcast, who predicts that this is going to spill over into an insurgency level type of warfare in like the border towns like El Paso and there. So in my view, I mean, I personally don't think we can trust the Mexican government, and you can certainly correct me. I'm not like that, fervent about it. Just like saying that, like, I personally don't view that. I hope I'm wrong, but like, what are we supposed to do? Action must be taken. This is just unsustainable how things have been going. And I could personally give a shit about the trade relationship with Mexico and the economics of it. I don't care if it brings higher costs to American and consumers. So personally, I want to see the narcos get decimated, bombs, whatever it takes, in a real way. But I'll let you respond to that.
No, I think so. What I would counter with this, so the violence have gone up and homicide has gone up, but let's not forget one thing, and this is very important. The main victims of cartel violence in Mexico are Mexicans, not Americans. It's Mexicans, right? Is there insurgency-like violence in Mexico? Yes. I'm not disputing that. But Paul, I would have to fundamentally disagree with you with this notion about trade. Like it's not just our economy would shut down. Like it would completely halt, cease to exist. Like our economy would stop if we decided to do anything that would it's not like a trade relationship that we have with, let's say, France. No, like it's not. It's our economies. Manufacturing would halt in America. Manufacturing would stop. Would be severely degraded if not stop. Farming, agriculture, like everything would cease. They are if one of our largest trading partners with Canada. The North American economy is highly integrated. You cannot analyze Mexico without taking that into account. Like if you're willing for our economy to stop to do this, okay, that's one. But it's not like, oh, our prices would go up. No, that's not what would happen. Right? It would be completely worse. And so I think I know which one you're talking about, because I think it's saying it's like, oh, insurgency, would get into El Paso. Okay. Let's again. One of the theories I was kind of going back and forth is this isn't a political insurgency; it's a resource-driven insurgency in Mexico. I'm not 100% convinced now about that, even that analogy. And I can understand that you can't trust the Mexican government. Of course you can't, but you deal with what you got, and you try to your best to do it, right? That's the reality of the world, and it's not only unique. It's like our relationship with Saudi Arabia. I mean, I don't think anybody here is like, yeah, MBS is a great guy and we all love MBS. No, we don't. But like, all right, well, you got to deal with him. It's the same with Mexico, right? But this going back to this insurgency aspect, right? Like, I'm like, okay, maybe there's a research-driven insurgency. Maybe that's a way of looking at it, and the Mexican government is a player into this conflict, etc. But this idea that is going to cross over to the borders, like runs counter to like everything the cartels want. Because it's like the cartels aren't going to challenge the U.S. military. They don't stand a chance. They're not stupid. 2 Americans were killed, and look how they're freaking out for 2 Americans. And they turned in the 5 guys, and they're praying, don't do any. And by the way, the Mexican cartels are very fearful of the Mexican government as well, right? They're fearful that the Mexican government is going to go. There's unwritten rules in this drug war between the Mexican government and the cartels and what's acceptable and not, right? The Arellano Felix organization that was based out of Tijuana, again, if you look Narcos Mexico's, the 2 brothers that were in Tijuana with the sister, right? That group, they got decimated and eliminated as for all intents and purposes because they killed a cardinal, a Mexican cardinal, when they were trying to kill El Chapo, right? And they made a mistake and they killed the cardinal. And what the Arellano Felix organization was actually trying to do when that happened is they actually gave the Mexican government locations of their staff houses, their safe houses, key figures, they were hoping to give them just enough that the Mexican government can clap down to claim a win and then back off, right? But by the mid-2000s, the U.S. and Mexican government had a joint military and law enforcement operation that said, we're done with these guys. We're going after them. They're going to jail. We're done, right? And they did it. The Mexican cartels can't challenge America. And I live in El Paso. I live in the border city. Like the safest cities in America are actually in the border. Like El Paso is one of these, and San Diego are 2 of the safest cities per capita in America. I have a guy that I know very well, and he's a DEA special agent stationed here in El Paso. And one of the things he'll say is like, look, he's like, you come to El Paso and people are like, oh my God, it's in the border, it's a drug war. He's like, it's a war zone. Oh. And he'll say, it's like, dude, he's like, it's way more dangerous for me to go to Philadelphia or a small town in West Virginia. Because he's like, dude, when we do raids there, like a drug raid in anywhere else in America, we can expect a shootout because these guys have nothing else to lose. They're going we're expecting a shootout. They have nothing to lose. These guys are more gang members. They're not that connected. They have they're going to shoot out with us. Here in El Paso, they do a raid, and the suspects 9 times out of 10 like, oh, you got me. Yep, I'm turning myself in. Put some cuffs on me. Like, yeah, you got me. All right. They don't care. They don't care here because they know that they're either going to be taken care of, or 2, they have so many other people that they could just pull and utilize. The cartels don't care. You're going to get us from it. Okay. We have millions more where these people came from. Doesn't matter. Even American. And a lot of them are American citizens. American citizens. They don't care. They know they're going to take care of. So this idea that an insurgency is going to someone creep across the border and they're going to they don't. And by the way, El Paso has Fort Bliss, like 1st Armored Division is stationed here. Like, trust me, I think there's 30,000 U.S. soldiers would love nothing more to stop doing bullshit duty in Fort Bliss of gate guard and being told, all right, guys, we're mobilizing. Let's go. Let's fight. This is where rhetoric and mixing conflicts is dangerous because Mexico is not Afghanistan. It's not. They're not the same. And you also have to take into account political, cultural, and economic links between our both countries are so in depth that you just cannot dismiss that out of hand. And I understand the fentanyl crisis is a problem in America, but to blame that on cartels only, rather than look internally in our own country and seeing what drives consumption and drug consumption in America, that's a problem. You want to solve the fentanyl crisis and the drug problem in America? Look at why people are doing drugs rather than going to cartels who, by the way, traffic avocado, who traffic oil, who traffic water, who traffic lime, who traffic wood. All those are legal. They'll traffic anything for money. They'll extort. They don't care. They don't need drugs. So I just think it's a scary boogeyman. Okay, let me back up. It's an easy escape rather than trying to really delve into the problem of American drug consumption and trying to figure out the real solutions that we need. Because at the end of the day, you need to figure out the consumption side of the house more and put more effort into that. And as a country and as a society, we put 0 to no attention on that when we just focus everything on the producers, when we need to focus more on the consumers.
Well, when I started speaking with you, All Source, I asked for 3 points to solve the cartel violence problem, and I think we're slowly getting there. But OPSEC, despite you being co-host, I hope you don't mind. Cameron's been waiting a very long time. I'm hoping to go to Cameron and then to OPSEC, and then we might finally free all source, and then we'll have 30, 40 minutes just to cover a few of these other news points. Cameron, go ahead.
Thank you, Michael. So I just wanted to ask All Source his opinion on some of this. So I think a lot of people get the cartels mixed up with gangs, and they do traffic in violence as well. But I think at the end of the day, people fail to realize they're a business. I know you were talking about the American guns flowing there, and I don't really see a way that that flow could get cut off, but say it did, would you expect that they'd source it elsewhere, like kind of like the conflicts in the Philippines, where like a lot of those guns are locally made near Mindanao, and like there's all sorts of like global arms markets. And I mean, I personally know people that have built some from scratch with CNC machines, like even the barreling and stuff like that. Do you think they'd do that since that's more simple than like large scale drug production? Or do you think like ammunition would be an issue? Or I know Mexico, that's often a point of contention. I wanted to get your opinion on if they'd be able to source it effectively elsewhere, even at a higher cost, and if they can keep
because you cut off for a second for me. I think it was a connectivity. Are you related to drugs or weapons?
It's related more so to the weapons. So,
Yeah.
Like I was just gonna ask.
So
Like, I see them with RPG-7s and like guns from other places. I know that predominantly is coming from the U.S., but do you think they could effectively source it all elsewhere too?
yeah, no doubt. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they could. I mean, maybe it would be a little bit more difficult if we couldn't control it. Like it would be harder, not harder. But yeah, I mean, these guys are people who traffic drugs across the world. So I mean, they can source it from other areas, right? And oh, by the way, a lot of the weapons also that the cartels get is from like the Mexican military and Mexican government. Like they just buy it from corrupt local officials, like i.e. Afghanistan, right? Like so but I think it is important to highlight like the fact that they get 70% of their guns from America rather than like Mexico or other parts of the world. I think they're looking at they want guns easily. And I think that's the problem. Like they're like, oh, we'll just get it from America. And by the way, it's like you cross into from, if you're in the land border, like you cross from Mexico into the US, you go through, CBP checkpoint. You go from from the US to Mexico, 9 times out of 10, there's nothing. Like they don't have the resources to really control their border as much as we think they would. Right. So the Mexicans are going to go in the path of least resistance. And right now the path of least resistance is to get it from America. Now, if we cut that off somehow, does that mean that they can't get any weapons? No. But I think it's kind of a condemnation of America and how we view and our issues when the cartels just say, it's easier to get it from America than, let's say, anywhere else, or even manufacture. And we do see them manufacturing local things like some explosive devices. We've seen a lot of reports of homemade motor systems. We've seen that. There's been pictures of that, and they use it, but it's not as effective. And that's kind of one of the things that I would like to kind of annotate is that a lot of the weapons that we see is kind of the small arm caliber up to like 50 cal, right? 50 cal and below, plethora. Once you get higher than that, that is not as common. It's not as common to see the RPG-7s, i.e. like if you go to Afghanistan, right? In Afghanistan, everybody and their mother has an RPG-7. You go to Mexico and no, they don't. That's not that common to see. What you see is very common is M82s, the anti-material rifles. I know OPSEC knows I'm going to say it. Like one thing I never get is why they have an M82, but they don't have a scope. But that's an internal joke of ours. But I think that's something that's very important to highlight, that the weapons they use is like, M2, think of your M2 Browning, below a lot. Above that, now you're getting into rarer things and not as common.
Do you feel like how would you feel like they should combat that? Like I know Fast and Furious was a big thing, and then there's been lots of issues where like even U.S. Army weapons have ended up down there. Like, do you feel like there's really a way to stifle it, or in a country with 400 million guns, it's pretty hard to crack down on exports?
And I think that's a legitimate way to say, like, oh, how can we do it? But then I think then the flip side to that is, then how can we demand the Mexicans from controlling the drug trade? You see where I'm getting at? If we have more resources, we're the largest economy in the world, and we can't control our drug flow. I mean, our weapon flow. How can we expect a country that is significantly poor with less resources to control the drug trade, right? And I think that's the double-edged sword. Because I agree with you, it's very difficult for us to do, and I think you can try, but you're not going to stop it. And I think it's the same from the drug perspective. And oh, by the way, even if you stop the drug trade, they'll just go to something else. And Cameron, I'll just end at this point, right? I know people, when they talk about cartels, people will go back to just legalize drugs or maybe decriminalize drugs, right? Let's say you go to the extreme, legalize. My belief is you legalize drugs in America, violence is going to explode in Mexico. Absolutely explode. Because if you take away the main revenue stream that they have, you're forcing these guys then to go back to territorial control rather than transactional drug trade. Now they just need territory. And that is something that I think people don't connect the dots. And so that's also a different problem set in and of itself that I can take 5 hours to have a conversation. And maybe that's another Substack I'll write. And then maybe I should.
Well, if nothing else, hopefully, Allsource, we've inspired you to write a couple of these pieces that you've been thinking about for a while. And if you want encouragement or, editing or, research services, reach out to some of us. I'd be happy to help. I did want to free Allsource wrap up on this topic. I know we've kept him longer than he expected. Hopefully he's enjoyed it enough that he'll come back maybe in a couple of weeks, or if there's breaking news related to the cartels. Why don't we leave the last point to Allsource, to OPSEC, who, if I'm reading the nest correctly, may fancy himself a bit of a cartel OSINT account as well.
So absolutely not. I was actually going to frame this with the M82 and ask him why they never have scopes. But really what I'm curious about is sort of the creativity, ingenuity that we see from these organizations. And I understand that this is not a Mexican cartel, but you had posted a picture of this narco sub, and it seems like, to me, it's pretty impressive that they would have the forethought to use something like dazzle camouflage on a sub like that.
They're very resourceful. They're very resourceful. So I'm not. Yeah, these guys have multiple ways to operate, and I think you just can't underestimate them. And Michael, I did see, because I know we had a Pete here who had his hand up. I'm willing to take his question because I know he just came up for W Speaker. If he had a question for me, I can gladly take it, and then I know you can transition into the next one if that's okay with you.
Sure, Pete, if you'd like to go ahead. Love to hear your question.
Yeah, hi. I live in Oregon now, but I used to live in Texas. And when my wife and I got married, we spent 3 months in a VW van traveling all through Mexico. Dos mil kilometres. Anyways, and the Mexican people are an incredible people. They're kind, generous. I had a guy walk into the middle of a cane field, and they cut the cane fields down from one side to the other because of all the rattlesnakes. Well, he walked into the middle of a cane field, the rattlesnakes and everything, to find us the perfect piece of sugar cane. And the cartels have, there is no way in the world I would do what we did back then. Now it's just way too dangerous, and the cartels have taken over, and it's just sad because Mexico is an incredibly beautiful place, and literally we traveled all around Mexico from the Baja to all the way to Guatemala and stuff like that. And there was a few gangs back then, and but part of the reason all the fentanyl crisis is because there are a lot of people who are addicted to opioids, and they've had this massive thing about opioids, and they've basically cut them out. And all these people who are addicted to opioids are trying the fentanyl, not realizing it takes like 2 grams to kill them. And and it's supply and demand. We demand fentanyl, or some people do, and the cartels and whoever are more than willing to supply them. And that's all I wanted to say.
Michael, oh, you know what? Sorry, I got a little bit distracted. Pete, you bring up an excellent point. And by the way, like, I know I covered this, but I visit Mexico all the time. I fly there. I don't drive because I do agree that there is inherent risk. Now, ironically, as an American, you have inherent protection just because you're an American. That is a fact. There was a very famous video about 2 years ago, I want to say, maybe in 2021, of an American gay couple who was on the car driving, and Sicarios pulled them over thinking they were somebody else. And then when they saw, and they even asked them, oh, and they even said, oh, Americano, American. They're like, yeah, we're American. And you could see the Americans were clearly distraught, freaking out, panicking, rightfully so. And the cartel members like, oh, I'm so sorry. We're so sorry. We thought you were somebody else. No, you're good. You're good. They were like, no, you're good. You're good. Please go ahead. We're still like apologizing to them, right? And unfortunately, we do get reports of Americans who go missing because a lot of times it's not just cartels. It's just there's petty violence and gang members there who don't give a shit, who don't care. Ransom kidnap is a thing that a lot of times the cartels have nothing involved, right? And so there's high levels of homicide as well that a lot of people might think is cartels and has nothing to do with cartel violence. It's just homicide rates in Mexico are extraordinarily high. Over 90% of those cases do not get solved, and a lot of them have nothing to do with the cartel violence, right? And so it's just kind of this back and forth issue, right? But as you said, Mexico is a beautiful country, and I travel there. My recommendation to anybody there who travels, who wants to travel to Mexico, follow the State Department guidelines, right? And even look at the standards they use for U.S. employees, U.S. government employees, and then follow that. So they will have like U.S. government employees are prohibited from driving along this Mexican highway, right? If the government is saying to the U.S. government, because the government can't tell an American citizen you can't do this for obvious reasons, but if it's dictating to American government and U.S. government employees, you will not travel here. That's kind of where I would be like, follow that. That's the guideline you need to follow, and that would make it better. I do unfortunately agree with you because a lot of it's just petty crime, petty theft, normal criminal activity. It has nothing to do with cartels because cartels understand they don't want to screw with Americans for the most part, but others don't. And yeah, I wouldn't recommend now driving across Mexico. It's just not, in certain parts of Mexico, it's not safe. Mexico City is very safe, extremely safe. Go visit Mexico City. Go for it. It's a beautiful city. I love Mexico. I love it. I was actually there basically a month in 2018. So it's a pity. I agree with it, but I don't want people to believe that you cannot visit Mexico. Just follow not only the U.S. government guidelines, but follow, if you're not use American as a guideline, or if you're a foreign national that's not American, follow your host nation guidelines for visiting that country and use that as a way to determine to travel or not, because there's a lot of beautiful, amazing, and extremely safe parts of Mexico that are 100% worth visiting, and you would be missing out if you just, and I am guilty of this because of what I cover, but don't utilize me as a reason not to travel to Mexico. I beg of you, do not use me as an excuse or a reason or a fear. I'm not trying to cause fear. I'm trying to highlight an issue that I think that gets not that much coverage. And again, I'll end with this point. It impacts Mexicans way more than Americans. And what I do not like when we talk about Mexico is that we put our U.S. domestic political lens in analyzing Mexico. I know it's difficult, it's nearly impossible, but the real way to understand and analyze Mexico, remove our political lens and analyze it neutrally, and especially from a Mexican perspective, because these people live it, they suffer it. And I think it's a crime and negligent that we have U.S. think tanks across America that will fuck with us more. And I'm not trying to say which one's worse, which conflict. I'm not. Of course, right now, Russia, Ukraine, in every measurable way, is the greatest human tragedy right now of impacting us, right? So don't take this the wrong way. But I never understood how is it that U.S. think tanks will cover more, let's say, Pakistan. You can find research papers on Pakistan easily, and almost little to none, or bare minimum, same research and analytical and think tank analysis on Mexico, one of our largest trading partners that we share a massive border and have huge political economic links. It just blows my mind. And I think that, Michael, if we want to start getting to solutions to that, that is what we need to think. Demand the Atlantic Council, CSIS, all these guys, for the love of God, can you give us some analysis on Mexico? But yeah.
Well, I think that's a great point to lean toward wrapping up, although I will let OPSEC come in for a last word. OPSEC, did you want to jump in with a last word on the cartel Mexican issues? Looks like we may have lost OPSEC for a moment, so that's no problem. AllSource, thank you very much. As always, you're a great speaker. I think based on the number of questions that you had, I know there are more that could be asked of you. I know thinking your time was maybe more limited, I cut several of my own. So hopefully you will be open maybe in a couple of weeks to coming back and chatting with us again. So just thank you very much. And honestly, if you would like any support, research, editing, just encouragement to get some of those articles written, reach out to me. I'm happy to help. And
absolutely.
So it looks excellent. So we'll get those written, and we'll bring everybody up to speed, and maybe we'll get a couple more accounts that can work with you. So we are just bringing OPSEC back up. He may have one more point.
While we're waiting for OPSEC, I just wanted to say to AllSource that from just an open source standpoint, watching how you engage with other open source aficionados like yourself is something that is very instructive, and not just in how you do it and how you are open to being questioned and readjusting how you're looking at something. I think anybody in the space who takes note of the kind of effort you put forth learns a lot, and not only just how to interrogate information, but how to be collegial and friendly and funny. And I think it's all those things are important when you're looking at information and news and developments that are often grim and at the same time affecting everyday civilians who are going through all sorts of terrible experiences in relation to it. So you do it in a way that is very sensitive in a lot of ways, and I just appreciate it. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you so much, guys. Michael, again, thank you for hosting this. Definitely would be open to do this again. Please let me know. And Jacoby, I appreciate everything that you guys do. So again, thank you for the opportunity to speak. If anybody, I'll end with my last point. If, again, please, for the love of God, if anybody here speaks Portuguese and would love to do Brazilian gang violence, is something I've always wanted to look into better, more, and expand. I think that's very important. So for any OSINT aficionados here, if you're looking for something to cover and you think you can cover that, go for it. Let us know. That'll be awesome. Again, guys, thanks and have a great night.
Good night. Okay, guys. Hopefully we can move on to a bit of a roundtable discussion. So I had outlined 3 topics. Since we had such a wonderful discussion with all source, it's likely we won't have time to get to all three of them, but we may as well dive into some. If any of the things that we discuss trigger something that you'd like to add, or you have a resource you'd like everybody to see, please do request the mic, and we'll bring you up to speak. If you're enjoying this conversation, if you enjoyed what you heard from all source, please do retweet this space. We'll get more people into the discussion. Just as a change of pace, before moving to the roundtable discussion, I thought I would point out, I often like to highlight some good OSINT examples that come up in the few days since my last space. I might not go into each of them as I normally do, but I will draw your attention first to an exercise. So if you have a look in the nest, the second item up there is a tweet by Christian Tribert, and he is in charge of visual investigations. I believe that's his title at the New York Times, and they do some very interesting work. And this is the first time I've seen it. He has something that he calls quiz time, or his Thursday quiz. I've never seen it before, but I guess he may have been doing it for a little while now. And essentially, it's a geolocation challenge of the sort that those who have been around a long time had seen that Exit would hold these spaces. And I thought this one looked fun. It had some interesting elements, and you'll see that in the photo there, which is a tugboat pushing a barge set in front of the background of a city, he's asking not only identify where it is, which would be geolocation, but can you identify the boat, and can you identify what the barge is carrying, and and its route, destination and point of origin. And I have it on good authority that some people in the space have looked at this and have come up with some interesting answers. Who knows if they're right or not? So the entry level to the puzzle would be figure out who in the space has dealt with it. But when you don't read their answers. Go off and do it on your own. I will say that, if you know a little bit about marine traffic tracking, so there's, I believe the app is called Marine Traffic. That's one great resource. Also, if you have a little bit of ability with image searching, that will help you out as well. So go check that out. And then just beyond that, while I like to bring up good examples, I also like to bring up cautionary examples. And so the third tweet in the nest is my tweet from this morning, and I put it out as a reminder not to rush. If what you're doing in OSINT work, if it's not time sensitive, it's not life and death, you can wait sometimes. And All Source spoke to that early on in the conversation when I was asking him, what standard do you use? And among the standards he said he uses is just sometimes to wait, or he has good accounts that he tracks. And sometimes if he gets a bit of breaking news, he'll sit on it for a little while until another good account refers to it. And then if he has a little bit of additional information to add, he'll put it out then because he's more confident that it's real. So this example that I'm highlighting is, I'm sure that many of us in the space saw either the image or the video of the Ukrainian soldier who had been captured and was then killed, famously immediately after saying Slava Ukraini. And there was immediately speculation about his identity. And a lot of people started putting names out there, and two particular names were circulated. And a Ukrainian spokesperson, I believe it's in the tweet, I think it was a deputy minister of defense, I think, came out and said, hey, we also want to contact the family. We want to be sure who it is before you go putting names out there. And then in fact, it turns out that the person whose name got most widely circulated was not the actual name of the soldier killed. And the Ukrainians came out and said, no, it was the other name that was being speculated about. So that's just a word of caution that if you don't have to put information out there, sometimes if you just wait a little while, then you'll avoid a mistake. Before I go on, JJ, did you want to come in?
Sorry about that. I was switching between screens. Just on interesting links, I saw one earlier today by a BBC journalist who focuses on disinformation and conspiracy and extremism. And he did a really cool beginner thread on how to reverse image search. So I will shoot that to Jacoby in case you want to share that and have a closer look at it.
That would be great, and I do encourage anybody who sees interesting content that's maybe good intro to OSINT material, that you can DM me with it, and I'll try to include it in these spaces, or come up and speak to it, particularly early in the space when I'm running through resources of that type. Okay, so jumping into the roundtable topic. The first topic I wanted to get to was just developments in Georgia, Moldova, and the broader Central Asian countries, because there have been a few developments there. I don't know how much conversation this will generate, but I wanted to introduce these points because I find them interesting, even if it's just background for your understanding of what's happening there. I'm sure most of you will have heard about the protests that have been going on in Georgia. OSINT Defender held a space last night where we chatted about it at a little bit of length. So it is now the 5th item back in the nest, I think. But it's a tweet by Anna Aptsiari. And she put out just a good background thread explaining what it is that this bill in Georgia would do, this new law that would put additional obligations on non-governmental organizations and potentially designate some of them that take foreign funds as foreign agents, and how, if that law were to be adopted in Georgia, it could likely drive a wedge in the ability for Georgia to integrate into the EU, because right now I believe it's an EU candidate country. And it's been speculated that this law has been introduced partly in an effort to prevent advancement toward EU integration. Of course, there have been huge protests, and the latest word, so if you scroll through the nest, the latest word, the protesters had made 2 requests, one of which was that the bill be withdrawn, the other that all those protesters who were detained in the first days of protesting, it was something like 80 or 90 protesters arrested, that they all be released. And so, again, a thread from Anna, where she notes that the government has come out and said they will be withdrawing the law. However, it hasn't happened yet. For those who aren't familiar with how parliamentary systems work, the law had passed first reading, and in general, laws have to pass 3 readings in a parliamentary system before they would be adopted. And if there's a Senate or a higher house, then they have to consider the matter as well. So this had advanced through the first reading. Apparently, under Georgian law, once it's passed a reading, it can't be withdrawn by the person who proposed it. Instead, it would either have to be voted down and actually defeated, or it could be left on the order paper and just not advanced. But that wouldn't provide much comfort to the protesters, because then it would technically still be on the books. And the government could change its mind and move forward to second and third readings fairly quickly. So in any event, I haven't heard yet, unless it's happened in the last 3 or 4 hours, that the government has actually voted it down. And it remains to be seen whether they will. I don't think they've spoken to the method they're going to use to meet the protesters' demand. The other demand was that those detained be released. And the Georgian Ministry of Internal Affairs put out a notice this morning saying that they had released all those detained. However, they also said that they're continuing to investigate and that charges may still be placed. And so, again, I'm not sure that that will totally satisfy the demand of protesters, in that while they are free, if many of them wind up being charged and convicted, that will probably cause further tensions within Georgia. Related to that, so the reason I've grouped Georgia and Moldova and the Central Asian republics together as one topic is just looking at the waning influence of the Russian Empire. And so this, protesting in Georgia is one example of that. The example in Moldova that I thought was interesting is that a Transnistrian state security minister, and so, of course, Transnistria is a breakaway republic in Moldova that has Russian troops stationed there and is Russian sympathetic. And so they're not exactly an independent country, but they have a lot of autonomy. The state security minister came out and said that they had prevented a terrorist attack that had been planned, and that specifically it was ordered by the Ukrainian security service. Now, I'm not taking that particularly seriously, but it was interesting to me that they would come out and suggest that, because that would imply quite a provocation by the Ukrainians if they were planning attacks on Transnistrian territory. And so I just wanted to highlight that, to my mind, that's an escalation, at least in the rhetoric, and may be dangerous. So do keep that on your radar. Before I go ahead, Cameron, what have you got for us?
So I read some interesting articles and pieces on what's happening in Georgia. And from my understanding, like the Georgian Dream Party, or it's something like that, they're heavily influenced by an oligarch who made a lot of his money in Russia. And I think about 70 to 75% of the Georgian population has been polled to be pro-Western and pro-EU. And they want to meet the criteria to join the EU. But there's a few people who have close business ties with Russia that appear to be influencing one or two of the major parties, including Georgian Dream Party, which I think won like 42 or 43% of the vote or something like that. So it's been kind of interesting watching that. They're saying they're going to meet some of the protesters' demands, but from what I've seen, they haven't exactly taken those actions yet. And but the rhetoric is now saying like they're going to withdraw the bill and release the protesters, but they still may file charges. So it's kind of interesting. Sorry, I just wanted to give an update if anybody was interested.
Yeah, thanks for that. And you're right that there's been speculation about the fact that a lot of this may be driven by an individual named Ivanishvili, who's the businessman I think you're referring to. And there are other issues in Georgian politics, including the imprisonment of the former president Saakashvili, who many believe is being held after having been convicted on maybe exaggerated or trumped up charges, and who has health problems. And he's being refused the opportunity to seek medical care for his serious issues outside the country. No, I don't have a definitive opinion on that, but I'm just pointing out that there are many points of tension in Georgian politics beyond simply this foreign agent law. And just because the government appears to be acceding to the demands of the protesters on this issue doesn't mean that there won't be continued, agitation to try to derail EU integration. So moving on quickly, I'll actually move it to the front of the nest so that you guys don't have to scroll back 6 or 7. Moving to Central Asia, there's a thread that's kind of a summary of developments in Central Asia by Mark Galliotti. It should be the first item up in just a moment. And in particular, there's been a lot of coverage of Kazakhstan and its the the various ways in which it's stood up to Russia, including, by restricting some trade and being very clear that their oil is not Russian oil, so that it can continue to be exported. And there was a famous clip of the Kazakhstani president, sort of upbraiding Putin at one of the talks. And so further to that, in Mark Galeotti's thread, he's just noting that the anti-corruption committee chair had said that really there is no respect for Russia in Central Asia. And then he goes into several points, including the closing of trade missions recently, that really hint at their declining influence over the region. And then finally, on this sort of survey through Central Asia is an event. I didn't include it in events because it's pretty specific to this one, but I believe it's actually going to be held tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., I assume Eastern US time. It's been moved to the front of the nest now, and it's being put on by the Atlantic Council Eurasian Center on what's the trajectory of the Georgian Euro-Atlantic future. So if that's a subject you're interested in, do check out that talk. So Jacoby, maybe you could just give people kind of an admin reset for a moment. I'm just going to pull up information for our next topic.
Sure. If you are enjoying this conversation, please do take a moment and retweet the space so that your followers can, or people that you'd like to share this with, can see the space and take part in the conversation too. There is a whole bunch of information that's in the nest that we're putting down into the replies, so that if you happen to see something or hear something that's being talked about that you want to follow up with or grab, and then you suddenly see that it's disappeared from the nest, don't be too worried about it, because it's down in the replies, or also contained within Michael's thread as well. So, or if you can't find it, just DM me or Michael or anyone that's a frequent member of the space, and we'll try and help you out.
Thanks very much for that. So I will probably run the space another 5 or 10 minutes, just maybe to get this last news update in, and then those other topics that are fairly interesting, including the transfer from Russia of uranium under separate circumstances to Iran, and transfer of uranium from Russia to China, both of which came up in the last few days. Maybe we'll take that issue and we'll push it out to our next space, which, by the way, will be on Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern. I'll put the invite to that space up in the nest in just a moment, so you can set your reminders. Hopefully you'll come and join us. The next item I wanted to talk about was recent developments in connection with the Nord Stream pipeline attack. Before I go ahead, though, I did see John put his hand up. John, did you want to come in?
Oh yeah, just a quick. I got a couple of resources that I can. We can talk in DMs probably about the last topic you mentioned about China and the uranium.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, I always encourage people, if they have interesting resources, to let us know, because we do want to make this a collaborative effort. So on the Nord Stream pipelines, on the attack on the Nord Stream pipeline, for those who have been following it, it still remains a bit of a mystery as to the cause. There's been a lot of speculation. It really came back into sort of the front of public consciousness about 2 weeks ago, when a well-known journalist who had formerly been quite acclaimed by the name of Seymour Hersh published what he said was an investigation on his Substack, and so it wasn't published in a major publication, and it was apparently based on his interviews with a single source, where he asserted that the Nord Stream pipeline was destroyed by the United States in collaboration with Norway, and that it was quite a production. And he made a lot of specific assertions in that reporting. And there is an OSINT account. It's a gentleman named Oliver Alexander, who has been doing great work throughout the war in Ukraine, on several things, including the Kerch Bridge attack. And he, in particular, dug into the claims in Hersh's story, which included, allegations about the name of a specific boat that was used in the attack, according to Hersh's account, and several other details. And he showed that they just were not true. And he's done a great job with that. Oliver also publishing his findings on his Substack. And so you can find links to his Substack in the nest. What I've put up are some of his most recent points. And so the second item in the nest is actually his initial reaction to the article in the New York Times, which has sort of caused a different type of controversy. That New York Times article alleged that the attack on the Nord Stream pipelines may have been carried out by a non-government group that is pro-Ukrainian, or perhaps some of the individuals involved may have been Ukrainian themselves. But Oliver's criticism of that initial reporting from the New York Times is that it didn't really include any actionable intelligence. There wasn't very much to verify, essentially just saying we've had this report and sources and methods have not been revealed to us. A German newspaper, Die Zeit, then came out with considerably more detail, including claims about the name of the ship that was used, and that it was a team of 6, and various details that researchers are, open source researchers are now digging into, including Oliver. Before I continue, though, I see that Nick has put her hand up. Did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, well, actually, I had like 5 questions, but anyway, just to kind of make it short. First of all, I want to thank you because I was on Aaron's Space last night, and I think it was last night, you stepped in, and just appreciate the space. And sometimes and I just love how all of you support each other and bring so much to the conversation, because questions come up and you don't have the expert or whoever, and that's why I really enjoyed listening to All Source. And I had other questions for him, because I used to live, and sorry if I'm backing up a little bit, but in Ohio, where Miami, I-75 from Miami to Detroit is a huge drug run, as well as I-65 and
Nick,
I-74. Yeah, sorry.
So Nick, since we're getting toward the end of the scheduled space, I suggest maybe we not go back to revisit the cartels issue at this point. But if you do have questions for All Source, if you write them in the replies to the thread for the space, then we'll collect them and we'll have them available when he comes around next time. Did you have anything you wanted to add in connection with the Nord Stream story?
Well, yeah, because I really think it's really going to be, they're going to come out and make it like a false flag thing. They're going to make it sound like it's Ukraine. But we all know who did it, so.
Well, to be fair, I'll admit that I don't know who did it. I do know that some of the stories that have been asserted about who did it are not correct, like the Hersh interview. While researching the Hersh's claims, Alexander encountered some interesting evidence, where he was looking at the construction ships involved, particularly in the Nord Stream 2 pipeline construction. Apparently, some of them had kind of faulty service records, in that there were doubts about the ability of the ship to actually complete the work that was required. And he noted that there was extremely bad weather for a day or two. When he looked back at the track of that construction ship, the worst of the weather hit when it was quite close to the point where the break in the pipeline occurred. And that's not causal, but it does mean that there are some legitimate questions about perhaps there may have been flaws in the pipeline. Now, given that 3 of the 4 lines were destroyed, his hypothesis, which he doesn't claim to have proven, is that it's possible that there may have been contingency plans in place to attack the pipelines, and that but what initiated the series of events, because my understanding is that the first break occurred something like 15 hours before the subsequent breaks. And his hypothesis is that the initial break may actually have been just an accident or a natural failure in the construction of the line. And that when that occurred, those changed the circumstances or the calculus around the economics of the lines, that may have been the initiative for whoever might have had this contingency plan to attack the line to then move forward with it. But that's entirely hypothetical, and I would encourage you to go to Oliver Alexander's Substack to read his writing about it. Before I go on, Cameron, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to comment on the Nord Stream. I'm not going to take too long, but I do find it interesting how it appears to have like more of an actual propaganda value than it actually does like a physical inert value of blowing it up, because it wasn't operational anyway. It seems like Germany's not going to be resuming gas supplies, yet it seems to be used in political arguments against the West or against Russia an awful lot. And I'm not really sure it's as big of a deal as a lot of people make it out to be, but it sure gets a lot of coverage. Irish politicians, certain US politicians, and certain European parties do seem to be using it as a way to kind of sow division in Western unity, which I find very weird. At the end of the day, like, I don't think anybody's going to stop trade relations over a piece of infrastructure that wasn't being used and will never be used again, probably blowing up, whether it's intentional or not. I mean, to me, it seems like somebody did blow it up, and some of the reports are conflicting, so I think it'll be interesting to watch more data come out, but it's really hard to put a decisive yes or no on who did it, but that's just my comment.
Well, and as different groups are digging into it in different ways, it's entirely possible that something conclusive could come up, but clearly it's taking quite a lot of work. And so the status of that at the moment is based on these investigations that were reported by the New York Times and Die Zeit. Apparently, the German law enforcement has now searched a ship. That it's reported that ship has some owners who are Ukrainian, but it was not used by them. It was leased. Apparently, it's alleged that it was leased to others. And so apparently they have searched that ship. It has been leaked that the claim that residue of explosives was found on the ship in question, whether those are the right types of explosives or, where it was found or quantity, I don't think has been discussed. So again, it's not entirely conclusive. But again, Oliver has been digging into the background of this ship. And let me see, I had one other interesting one. It was actually Bellingcat had been undertaking a process on their Discord server, and it was just a great example of collective OSINT work. I will dig that up for a moment, but I see Jacoby's put her hand up. Jacoby, go ahead.
This is slightly off topic, going back to something that you had shared in the nest a few minutes ago about an event that the Eurasia Center had shared for tomorrow morning, and regarding Georgia's proposed foreign agent law. Actually, that appears that there's maybe an error in that tweet that is shared, indicating that it's an event for tomorrow morning at 8. In fact, it's an event that took place on March 8th, and we have it already in the calendar, and the link to the event recording is available through the link that we put up, so you can already watch it. So it's a little bit confusing, but it already happened. So
the beauty of that is that because it's happened, you could listen to it tomorrow morning, imagining it was scheduled for then, but since it's a recording, you can listen to it anytime you like. But thanks for clarifying. So that gave me a moment. I did find the tweet. It's by Eric Toller, who works with Bellingcat, and the version of, or the part where I jumped into the thread with the retweet here is where he's requesting assistance from those who have access to some fairly specific naval tracking websites, which I thought was interesting because these professional sites, he notes they cost several $100s to get access to their databases. And so when we, as, well, at least I, as a hobbyist or amateur OSINT investigator, when I engage in it, would look at some of these services and say, boy, it would be great if I had a couple of $100 to drop on this database. I would be able to find so much more. Or similarly, for those who do satellite analysis, they're having to solicit and the donations to support their work, and the amount and quality of their work relies on the support of the community. So Eric, I thought it was interesting seeing somebody from Bellingcat sort of complaining about the same concept. But then if you scroll down the thread, several tweets, there are many, many interesting pictures, including of the shipyards, and scrolling down, they actually managed to dig up some old archived photos of the ships in question that allowed them to look at, sort of size and layout and so on, which helps a little bit in evaluating the plausibility of the story put forward by the New York Times and DZ'd. So they haven't, neither Bellingcat, as far as I know, nor Oliver Alexander have reached a conclusion about these latest claims about Nord Stream, but I wanted to highlight it as being very interesting because it has, geopolitical implications, and it's a great example of a mystery that's being unraveled, and we can all, follow along a little bit. And so, in fact, knowing this was a live issue, I had actually DM'd a little bit with Oliver just to see if he might be willing to come and chat with us about his research. He wasn't able to make it tonight. I didn't realize he's based in Europe, and so it's 4 a.m. for him. But he did say that he might be willing to join us, if not this Sunday, perhaps in a future Sunday space that's a more reasonable time for our friends in Europe. So it's possible he may come out shortly, so keep your eyes out for that, which I think is a great place to conclude. And I'll note that if you'd like to set a reminder for that conversation, it will be this Sunday at 4 p.m. We'd love to have you all there, and you can have a look at the invite in the nest, and the reminder will pop it up in your notifications. Thanks to everybody who listened all the way through, made it to the end. I think it was a great conversation with AllSource. Once again, we do hope to have him back. And because he's sort of a friend of the space, I think he'll pop in from time to time, even if he's not sort of the featured guest. Thanks to everybody who came up to speak and contribute tonight, and in particular to my co-hosts, Jacoby and OPSEC, who make this space so much better with their assistance. So again, thanks to everybody, and I hope to see you all this Sunday.